Let's now take a look at the contents of the two volumes. Volume 1 opens with a very short introduction outlining the historical background of the sources. Then follows a Thoroughbass primer for beginners by yours truly. Some may question why such a primer is necessary, since the goal of the series is to allow students today to learn directly from historical sources. This is a valid critique. The reason for including a primer, however, is that those readers with no prior experience with Thoroughbass may still find it difficult to interact with the original sources without some kind of mediation. Those readers who are already familiar with Thoroughbass can simply skip the primer or just use it as a quick review. Next follows J.S. Bach's brief list of rules, and then two sections taken from the anonymous Precepts and Principles. These are the principles of playing in 4 parts and the most common cadences, plus an appendix of suggested realizations. Then follows CPE's 14 new melodies with 2 appendices of realizations. Finally, Volume 1 closes with the translation of Kellner's treatise, making 156 pages in all. Volume 2 opens with the same introduction as found in Volume 1, followed by some remarks on the Sibley Chorale book. The vast majority of Volume 2 is the Sibley Chorale book itself, which includes an index of chorales and cross-references to settings of the same melody to facilitate comparison. Since the Sibley Chorale book is quite long, Volume 2 is 144 pages, or roughly the same length as Volume 1, even though it contains only one source. We'll now take a closer look at each of the sources. Here is an overview of the topics covered in my Thoroughbass primer for beginners. I assume that the reader has only very basic familiarity with music notation and with the keyboard. The primer itself is 27 pages long and includes 37 brief musical examples. The first of the historical sources in Volume 1 is Bach's list of 15 brief rules about doubling, such as, quote, with the 7/5, one takes the 3, end quote. The source is actually in Anna Magdalena Bach's hand and is found at the end of her Notenbuch from 1725. While these rules are available in other modern editions, their direct connection to Bach and to Thoroughbass justify their inclusion in Volume 1 with an updated translation. Now we come to the principles of playing in 4 parts from the anonymous Precepts and Principles. On the left side, we see the first page of the exercises. Note that these exercises do not involve chorale melodies. Rather, they are merely intended to teach the principles of Thoroughbass. Recall that, according to CPE, his father began by teaching Thoroughbass before proceeding to chorales. I have edited the exercises here to make them particularly appropriate for today's students. For instance, I have included a blank upper staff so that students can write out their realizations, as Bach apparently required his own students to do. All departures from the original source are outlined in this section's introduction, which includes some facsimiles of the original for comparison. Every exercise contains a reference to the page in Appendix 1 containing editorial solutions. For instance, on the right-hand side, we see some different ways of realizing an ascending 5/6 sequence, which is exercise number 3. Some editorial commentary follows after each solution. This commentary will be especially helpful for students using the series without the assistance of a teacher. The second section from this source, the most common cadences, also includes editorial solutions and commentary. Next we come to CPE's new melodies, which contain 14 Thoroughbass chorales in a very simple style, just like those in the Sibley Chorale book, as we will see. As in the previous section, I have edited CPE's chorales to make them especially easy to use for today's students. For instance, all note stems face outward, which affords more space for written out middle voices. In some cases, I also transpose the chorales into easier keys, since, in my experience, the original keys were sometimes too difficult for beginners. Again, all such departures from the original are clearly marked. There follow two appendices of suggested solutions as shown on the right-hand side. As before, the solutions contain detailed annotations to assist students who wish to use this series without the aid of a teacher. Volume 1 closes with the translation of Kellner's treatise, which was first published in 1732, the 2,000 copies of which apparently sold out quite quickly. Interestingly, Telemann wrote the preface to the second edition in 1737, praising the work for its concise and reliable instruction. This is the reason I have chosen to translate the second edition and not the first. Telemann provides yet another connection to J.S. Bach's circle, since Telemann and Bach were once close friends. Telemann was even CPE Bach's godfather. One imagines that these three occasionally discussed compositional matters, such that Telemann may have recommended Kellner's treatise to J.S. Bach or to CPE as a reliable introduction to Thoroughbass for beginners. There followed at least 10 more editions of Kellner's treatise throughout the 18th century. If each of these had only 1,000 copies, then there were well over 10,000 copies of Kellner's work circulating in Europe in the 18th century, making it perhaps the best-selling Thoroughbass treatise of all time. This alone is reason enough to justify an English translation of Kellner's work. As noted already, Kellner borrows heavily from Heinichen's treatise, which J.S. Bach acted as agent for, selling it out of his home. Moreover, new evidence brought forth by Robin Lever and me reveals that CPE endorsed the combined publication of his New Melodies with the 7th edition of Kellner's treatise around 1788. The publisher of this combined publication wrote in the preface that, quote, "It is the opinion of experts that chorales represent the best practice pieces for beginners of Thoroughbass," end quote. The publisher's mention of experts must be a reference to CPE Bach, meaning CPE Bach knew of and endorsed Kellner's treatise, just as Telemann did. The implication is that, in associating Kellner's treatise with the Thoroughbass chorales in the New Melodies, CPE Bach may have been preserving aspects of his father's teaching. After all, CPE said he never had any other teacher than his father. And since Kellner is primarily a digest of Heinichen, it seems J.S. Bach, Telemann, and CPE all subscribed to a similar theoretical outlook that held Thoroughbass and chorales to be the foundation of compositional training. Finally, we come to the anonymous Sibley Chorale book, a modern edition of which comprises the bulk of Volume 2. As noted already, Robin Lever recently attributed the Sibley Chorale book to J.S. Bach's circle of pupils active in Dresden around 1730 to 1740. The source itself contains 227 Thoroughbass chorales, meaning the chorale is in the top voice with a figured bass line below it, just as in CPE's 14 melodies. New Melodies. The player had to add the middle voices, as indicated by the title, which says, quote, Sebastian Bach's 4-part chorale book. That is, the 2 given outer voices should be supplemented by 2 middle voices. The most important ramification of the Sibley Chorale book is that the chorales are in the simple chorale Buch style and are intended for improvised or written out realization at the keyboard using Thoroughbass. Note that the chorales are not in the more complex style of Bach's ornamented four-part vocal Choralgesänge. The Choralgesänge, which originate from Bach's cantatas and passions, have played a central role in attempts to imitate Bach's teachings for centuries. But the Sibley chorale book, and indeed a whole host of similar sources from Bach's circle that have been newly rediscovered, are beginning to alter this time-honored tradition. To summarize, Bach's teaching appears to have involved a much simpler style than previously assumed, one involving Thoroughbass at the keyboard, not the Choralgesänge. This is a point I emphasize in my forthcoming dissertation. Another point I discuss in my dissertation is that Bach's teaching appears to have involved the composition of multiple figured bass lines below each chorale melody. There are literally dozens of multiple bass sources stemming from Bach's circle that have surfaced in recent years. Multiple bass chorale harmonization thus represents an exciting new area of Bach research and of historical pedagogy. But before attempting to compose multiple bass lines, Bach students had to first master Thoroughbass and the addition of two middle voices to a given outer voice chorale framework. My hope is that this publication may provide practical exercises in this regard that will be useful to students and teachers alike. I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to purchase a copy of the series, it is available for order at wayneleopold.com. There are also free materials for learning Thoroughbass that are available on my website, Remeš.com. There you can also find information about composition and theory lessons, which I offer via Skype. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time at Go Figure.